this meeting, as we've recorded all of our other Roundtable meetings, and you can find links to those recordings here on this Google document. It's the LTI Roundtable resources. It is an IMS forum post where that information is stored. So you will need to be logged into your IMS member account to access that. So thanks everyone for your attendance today. This is our, I don't know, 8th or 9th session of this Roundtable format. So I hope these are proving useful and that the past recordings are also providing some insight and some direction to how folks have been using and adopting LTI Advantage, and we hope to further that today. We're actually going to take maybe a step back in the sense of reviewing an overall picture, the basic understanding of LTI, not just from the technical side and the benefits, but the practical, higher level, maybe administrative side of the vision of LTI and LTI Advantage in particular. And Martin Lenord from Turnitin will be leading that discussion. So before we get to that, and then some of the questions you've submitted, there's a Google form, a link also here just above the agenda title in this Google document. And let me paste a link to that one more time in the Zoom chat in case anyone is joining and not seeing that. You can access that form, post questions there at any time. That's just an open form. We can collect those throughout the weeks between our Roundtable meetings. We've received a few just in the last couple of days, so we'll cover as many of those questions as we can as part of our meeting time as well. But if other questions come up, feel free to add them, either submit them to that form or just here in our Google document with our notes. So as part of this meeting, I want to make everyone aware of IMS's intellectual property rights policy. You can find a link to it also in the Google document. It's just below the table that has attendees. So that IPR statement published at imsglobal.org/IP requires us to read this, this following call. Please inform me if you're personally aware of any claims under any patent applications or issued patents that would be likely to be infringed by an implementation of the specification or other work product that's the subject of this meeting. You need not be the inventor of such patent or patent application in order to inform us that a claim might exist, nor will you be held responsible for expressing a belief that turns out to be inaccurate. And if you'd prefer to discuss IP or patent-related questions or information and would rather not discuss it during this meeting as a full group, you're welcome to contact me or any other IMS staff member at any time. IMS also has a participation agreement that's published at imsglobal.org/PA, also listed there in the Google document. And that essentially asks that details of these meetings, forum posts, draft documents, etc., not be shared outside of the membership of this group. Okay, well, welcome everyone. If this is your first Roundtable meeting, you picked a good one to join us, where we're going to do another high-level overview of LTI Advantage, maybe more from the practical side of things than the technical. However, if technical questions do come up, or even more on the practical side, we welcome your interaction. Would ask you to keep your microphones muted unless you do have a question. Feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand, type a question in the chat, or use our shared Google document as a way to help us keep track of notes or questions that come up. So we will cover that first, and then have some time for question and answer, and some of those based on submitted questions to our Google form. So let's go ahead and begin. And Martin, looks like you have the slides queued up that you've prepared, so I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Yeah, so as Mark said, my name is Martin Lenord. I'm a software engineer at Turnitin. I'm also one of the co-chairs of the LTI working group. So today what we're going to go over is kind of a bit of a back to basics of LTI Advantage. Rather than talking technical like we usually do, I'm going to attempt to go over LTI at a little bit of a high level, overviewing some of the reasoning behind why we've done certain things in LTI, but also generally what LTI is used for and what applications you might be able to use LTI within. So yeah, so just as a little overview of what I'll go over during the presentation, we'll start off just high level, what does LTI do, what are we trying to solve, why are we doing it the way that we do it, and then we'll move on to LTI 1.3, because that's the newest version of LTI that obviously everybody's trying to implement. A little bit of history behind it, how we got there, and what the uses are for LTI 1.3 over LTI 1.1 or something like that. And then LTI Advantage, because some people might have heard of Advantage, but not fully understand exactly what it means, how it differs to just LTI 1.3, or even how it kind of relates to all of that together. And then at the end, we'll have like a little bit of time to go over some of the things down the line that are coming up, and you can kind of prepare yourself for what might happen later on and what might be coming to the LTI specification in the future. So first things first is kind of what does LTI do? So we want to kind of go over a couple of common use cases for the main reason that people use LTI. And a lot of the main kind of users of LTI are going to be either application content providers or learning management systems wanting to integrate with one another and kind of do it in a nice, seamless way without having to do custom integrations or lots of extra work for each new application that they want to integrate into their learning management system, or vice versa. If you're an application, you don't want to have to do extra work to make yourself available within the kind of plethora of application and learning management systems or VLEs or anything like that. So within LTI, you have the ability to pass kind of the experience and data between these two systems. And we generally tend to refer to them as a tool and a platform. So an application or content provider is what's known as a tool, and the platform is usually a learning management system. It could be a different type of system, but a common use case is that they're used as learning management systems. You may have also heard, if you're used to kind of the 1.1 terminology of LTI in the past, a tool provider and a tool consumer. We no longer use that terminology just because it confuses itself when we're talking about some of the newer technologies that we're using, because they also use a consumer and provider notation, but it's flipped from what LTI 1.1 was talking about. So it obviously made things a little bit confusing. So this is the new terminology of how we talk about tools and platforms in LTI in general. And that's the main thing. So LTI has these two components that are integrating together, either a tool or a platform. There's nothing stopping you from being both, but in general, people will either be providing content from a tool or consuming content from a platform. So LTI is going to make this kind of seamless ability to transfer content from a tool to a platform and access the tool's content. But there are many different types of content that might want to make available to a platform, and you might want to use LTI for. So if you're not familiar with the kind of tools that already exist, there are a whole kind of bunch of different applications that LTI is being used for at the moment. And this is, not an exhaustive list of what you could use it for, but these are some of the common use cases that people would want to use LTI for, and what kind of content they want to expose. So assignment workflows, an example of that was I work for Turnitin. Both Turnitin and Gradescope provide assignment workflows. So students get launched into Turnitin from their learning management system. They complete an assignment, whether that be uploading a submission, or writing the submission out there and then, or in Gradescope doing a test, then that submission is processed, it's given scores, and those scores are returned back to the platform. There's publisher content. So publisher content could be pre-built courses that you want to import, or books, chapters of a book. So we have Cengage, Pearson, HMH. All of these publishers allow content to be brought from their kind of vast archives into a course and pulled in through LTI. Then we have games. So games are always a good, fun way of learning, and there are a number of examples of people using games as learning tools through LTI. You can use it to kind of track progress in any kind of learning game or something like that. And it allows you to know which students are interacting with those games, and who's doing what, and kind of generally just linking the flow together rather than having to have this separated system. And then lastly, I've got down here kind of utility tools. So this could be something as simple as a calculator. You might have a very specific calculator use case. It doesn't need to do anything fancy, but you want to embed that calculator into your learning management system somewhere, into a course, so that students can access it and use it. Same could be said about having a meeting room for a particular course that you're doing, or even notice boards that people might want to drop notes on, anything like that. So there's all of these kind of different types of content, and any content that you can kind of think of is likely going to be able to be integrated in some way through LTI. And the idea of LTI is to make that content kind of deeply integrated into the platform, rather than having to load up one system, go into a course, find the content that you want, but then get linked out into another platform that you then have to go and log in with a different set of credentials, or use something else to log into there, then go and find that content again and complete whatever you have to. Having all of that contained in one neat integration allows for a much better experience for the end users, and whether that be students or instructors. So let's have a little talk about LTI 1.3 and Advantage, and exactly what LTI 1.3 is and kind of what it does, and then what the difference between just talking about 1.3 is and LTI Advantage as a whole. Because I know people often get confused between the words kind of get thrown out of LTI 1.3 and Advantage, and people think, are they the same thing? Are they slightly different? So hopefully this should be able to clear up some of the confusion that people have over the different kind of terminology that's used within the IMS. So the first thing we're going to talk about is why you should use LTI 1.3 over, let's say, LTI 1.1. So to start off, we'll go over a little bit of history of kind of where LTI came from, so you get an understanding of what its original purpose was and how it's evolved over the years. So the first iteration of LTI is obviously LTI 1.0. And LTI 1.0 was very, very simple. It was a single launch request from a platform into a tool. And what that allowed you to do is it allowed you to not only log in a user from your platform into your tool, but it allowed you to do that and say what the content was that they were trying to access. And this was groundbreaking at the time, and it was signed with OAuth 1, which was the kind of security recommendation for the time. But it was a one-way communication. You could only send data from the platform to the tool, and then whatever the tool did to the platform, that was a complete black box. Nothing came out of it. They just filled in whatever the tool might be allowing them to do. So after that, LTI was developed a bit, and came out with LTI 1.1. So LTI 1.1 had exactly the same base as LTI 1.0, but additionally, basic outcomes was added into it. So basic outcomes gave a way of kind of closing the loop and allowed a simple grade between 0 and 1 to be passed back for each user on a particular resource within LTI. So that allowed some kind of output from the tool to say, hey, this is the grade for student 1 for this particular assignment that they've been doing. And that kind of closed the loop between the platform and the tool. And it was a very rudimentary system at this point. It's kind of the minimal amount of information that could be passed forwards and backwards between the tool and the platform, but it was a big step upwards from where it was originally in LTI 1. So then after LTI 1.1 come along, we had LTI 2. So as you can see, this whole presentation here and this slide says why are we using LTI 1.3, and I've just put LTI 2 on the screen, which obviously might cause a little bit of confusion as to, well, why aren't we using LTI 2? So LTI 2 came along, and again, it started on the base of LTI 1.1, which involved launching and grade passback. And then LTI 2 had launching, grade passback, and registration, launching, consumer profile services, proxy registration services, and tool setting services. All of these services and different launch types were all kind of combined into LTI 2 as this one kind of big package. And the problem that had is that at the time that LTI 2 was coming out, OAuth 1 was getting a little bit long in the tooth. People were starting to move to OAuth 2, and the kind of the step up in the amount of resources that it would take to implement it, well, people didn't want to implement all of these different things, all of these services, if they're only going to use a small part of the specification. So this is where we went back to basics in a sense, and we looked at LTI 2 and went, this is not going to be the correct way for the LTI spec to go. So we took a step back and started on LTI 1.3, and we looked at what is the core of what LTI is doing, and let's prioritize that and really improve on what LTI does. So the two things that LTI is doing is we're doing what are called message launches, where we're kind of showing the UI of a tool inside a platform or launching from a platform to say, this is a resource within a tool. And then the second thing is that we're calling back to the platform and saying, either give me some information about something, or here is some information about a result that we've created. So that's the core of LTI, is sending these messages or making these service requests. So what LTI 1.3 does is it defines how we send those message launches and how we send service requests, but this time, rather than being based on the OAuth 1 specification, which at this point had been deprecated for a fair amount of time, we moved forward and based the message launches on OpenID Connect, and the service definitions and the service calls on OAuth 2. So OpenID Connect is generally what you would use if you were logging in with Google or log in with Facebook, that kind of thing. But we've improved that and kind of built on top of that with the LTI specification to enrich what it can do. So let's just kind of have a look at quickly how that works. We started off with OAuth 2, which is the core. Like OAuth 2 is used across the internet by a whole variety of different kind of web services and other specifications. On top of that is something that's called OpenID Connect. And OpenID Connect, again, allows us to do these message launches and kind of communicate between platforms and tools and say, I want to log in as a particular user, passing data about who is authenticated to do what. So these specifications already existed. They've been tested by thousands and thousands of people, there are applications already existing that use these standards. So what we decided to do was to build LTI on this existing core of standards that other people had made and maintained, and we knew that the big players in security and kind of looking towards the future of how web interaction is going to work have all validated these specifications and are happy with how they're going to work. So on top of that, we built what's called the IMS security framework. So in some of the documentation that I'll link to later, you can read all about it if you really want to. But the IMS specification, the IMS security framework is a specification that tries to unify how all of the IMS services deal with authentication. So at the moment, it's, there's still some variation between the different specifications, but over time, the idea is that we can unify all of that under the IMS's security framework, which again will be built on top of these existing specifications. And then lastly, on top of that, we obviously have LTI 1.3. And LTI 1.3 defines kind of the how, what do we put in the messages, how do we call services, that kind of thing. And all of the main bulk of the security and kind of framework of communication is dealt with by existing standards and existing tested standards, which is good because unlike Auth 1 and LTI 1.0, a lot of the stuff that we were doing there was custom and made it hard for implementation, made it tricky for expanding on what the specification was capable of, because everything that we were doing was new. Nobody else was doing what we were. So that's the security of LTI 1.3. But the next thing is that gives us the core. So as you can see on this diagram, we have LTI 1.3 core, but the core doesn't really define a lot of usable specification. So you can do the basics of what you could do in LTI 1. So I can launch in from a platform into a tool and view a resource. But what you really want is you want a deep, rich integration. So what the LTI 1.3 core is doing is it's exposing a way that we can add those deeper integration extensions to the LTI specification in a really easy, kind of manageable way. So there are two types of extension: the message extensions and service extensions. And we've talked about different types of messages and services already. So the messages are kind of launches into view resources, and services are either getting or sending data from the tool back to the platform. And this will kind of build up an ecosystem of specifications around LTI of all these different extensions. So let's have a look at what's currently there. So the LTI Advantage is a collection of those specifications. So the first thing in LTI Advantage is obviously the LTI 1.3 core, because that defines how we're doing everything, how we're going to talk to services, how we're going to send messages. And then on top of that, we include deep linking. Deep linking is a way of asking a tool what content it can put back into a platform. So you might want to say create or select some content out of a repository or out of a publisher's directory. They might have existing courses that you want to import. That kind of thing can be done through deep linking. Then we have names and roles. Names and roles is a way of knowing what on a resource or who on can access a resource. So if I'm on a resource and I say, I want to submit something on behalf of a student, or find out which other students are on this particular resource, then names and roles allows you to fetch that information from a platform. And then lastly is assignments and grades. And assignments and grades is pretty similar to how basic outcomes works, but it kind of enriches the experience with a deeper integration of how you can send grades back. You can send grades back with more detail in them and more functionality. So we'll go over the specifications individually of what kind of makes up LTI Advantage. But what it's worth knowing is that all of those specifications, so the core, deep linking, names and roles provisioning, and the assignments and grades service, all come together, and that packaging is what's called LTI Advantage. So all of that together in a nice kind of neat package. It's in essence, the idea is that you can say that you're LTI Advantage compatible, and that allows you to know that as a tool, you can get a deeper integration with a platform if they support all of the LTI Advantage services, because you can ask for information about names and roles. You can integrate yourself through deep linking, and you can also return grades through assignments and grades. It's also worth noting that it's not a requirement that you have to certify LTI Advantage. You can certify one specification at a time. You can certify for just the core. I think one of the common confusions that people have is that it's Advantage or nothing. But that's not necessarily the case. If you're new to LTI and you are just starting on a tool and you want somewhere to start, you don't have to aim necessarily for getting all of Advantage working. It's worth just, can you get the LTI 1.3 core working first, and then add in bit by bit as you go, oh, well, it would be great if I could send some grades back, or selecting content is useful to me, so I'm going to do deep linking. And you can add these things in one at a time after doing the core. So the next thing we're going to do is just have a little bit of a deeper dive into each of the extensions. And we'll start off with deep linking. So deep linking starts at the platform, and if you're in a platform like a learning management system, and you've created a course that you want to do some, add some content to, you're going to say, I'm on this course and I need a book on Romeo and Juliet, and I've got a couple of chapters or something like that that I want to pull in about that. So what you would do is you would say, okay, I'm going to launch into my content provider. This could be Cengage or HMH or Pearson or whoever else, and they would give you the option to select the book that you want to import or the content that you want to import. So you can say, I'm going to select my content on Romeo and Juliet or whichever book, and we're working on chapters 6 and 8. So you can select a whole bunch of chapters, a whole bunch of content, and say, I want to put all of that content back into my course. And all of that content kind of gets put together and passed back into the platform. And the platform can then return that content into the course and add in multiple pieces of content at once if they support it, or you can select a piece of content at a time. It's also worth noting that it's not just used for selecting existing content. You could have a mechanism of creating content there. So you might want to launch in and then create the assignment. So you might say, I want to create a Turnitin assignment. So you would go into deep linking and say, create a Turnitin assignment. You would fill out what you want the assignment to be, and then you would go and create that assignment, and it would be added into your course. The same could be said of videos or any other content. So there's a whole plethora of different types of content that can all be returned through deep linking, and you can return multiple at once if you want to. And yeah, it really kind of helps the flow of creation inside a course content. So that's deep linking. The next service that we're going to talk about is the names and roles provisioning service. So inside names and roles, the first thing that we start off with is, again, the platform. and our tool. And from the tool, we're going to request that we want the memberships for the particular resource that we're looking at. So all of those pieces of content that we've added to a course, if I launch into any of those pieces of content and say, I want to view chapter 3, or I want to view my Turnitin assignment as an instructor, I might want to know who all of the students are that are using this piece of content. So a request is made from the tool to the platform, and the platform returns those members back to the tool. The main thing about this is kind of on the fly members. This is not roster syncing as such. It's more of an ad hoc, as you're using it, here are the members for this small section of the platform. You don't get to access the wider roster of students. It's just who is important to this particular resource that I'm currently looking at. And it's a little bit more localized. This generally happens between a tool and a platform. A bit of confusion that people will get is how this links in with something like an SIS, because the IMS has another specification called OneRoster, which is used to sync between SIS systems and platforms. And it's sometimes a little bit confused as to why you would want to do OneRoster over LTI memberships and where one is useful and where the other is useful. Generally, the reason why you would use OneRoster is to sync your users and courses from an SIS into a platform, and then return all of your line items and grades and sync them back into the SIS. This is generally done for kind of either reading or writing archives. So, you're either archiving all of the grades from your platform, or you're importing all of the users and courses from your SIS into your platform. Whereas for LTI memberships, it's as and when you're using it, it's also between a platform and a tool rather than an SIS. So that's the general overview of names and roles. And then the last service that is part of LTI Advantage is the assignments and grades service. So again, assignments and grades service is an improvement on the basic outcome service of LTI 1.1. And the idea is that when a student or a user is performing some actions inside a tool, they might be filling out a quiz or submitting an assignment or playing a game. They want to have some outcome from that that is trackable within the platform and within their gradebook. So the platform would launch into the tool, and the user would take whatever assessment they're going to be doing. It could be could be a test, it could be submission, whatever they're doing. And once that is taken, then it goes for grading. So the grade may be done automatically, it may be done manually, it doesn't really matter. But the difference between basic outcomes and assignments and grades is the richness of the grades that are being passed back. So in the assignments and grades service, you can pass back not only the grade, but the status of the submission. So you might even want to say that a grade hasn't been submitted yet, but it needs to be graded. You can pass back comments, so you can do formative feedback rather than just pure numbers. And you can send back other information with it, as well as having multiple grades for a single submission. So a place where that might be used is, for instance, in Turnitin. If you have an originality score and a teacher's grade that they've given a paper and a authorship score or something like that, I could pass back all 3 of those grades into the gradebook of the platform, and they would all show in the gradebook inside the platform as separate grades for each student. And that allows us to have a kind of much richer, much deeper integration with the platform than what was capable in LTI 1.1. And on top of that, all of these features allow you to work with just one of them. So if you didn't have anything that was outputting grades, then there is no need to implement assignments and grades service. You can build LTI and kind of plug and play and add these services and use them and utilize them whenever you need to. So that's the LTI advantage specification and kind of the services around it. But obviously, there are still things that aren't included in this specification that are kind of coming up that we've been working on. So there are a number of specifications that are in member candidate final. So anybody who's a member of the IMS can access these specifications. There is some potential that they might change a tiny bit, but it's very unlikely that they will have any substantial changes to them. These services can be made mainly because of how the core of LTI 1.3 was working, because it was easy to extend. It had that nice, easy extensibility where we could just add new services, add new message types without having to make big changes to the core. These specifications can exist on their own. And again, if you find one of the specifications useful, you can implement that on top of your existing LTI specification rather than having to rewrite everything just to add a new type of message or a new service. So the first one on here is the course groups service. The idea of the course groups service is they are kind of ad hoc context level groups. It's read only from the tool. So the tool can pull groups from a platform along with the members, and the tool has kind of free reign over what it would like to do with those groups. They're not specified as, this group can only be used for this purpose. It's down to the tool how they would like to utilize the groups. It could be that they're done as submission groups, so multiple students making one submission, or it could be marking groups for an instructor if they have certain students that they're supposed to mark but not others. It's completely down to the tool how they want to do that. Then there's the submission review specification. This is a spec to improve the way that you access submissions through LTI. So at the moment, if I'm looking in my gradebook and I see that a student either needs to be graded or their grade looks concerning to me, so I want to have a look at their submission or the test that they've done, I would have to go back out of my gradebook into my course content, find the LTI tool that was responsible for that particular score, launch into that, and then find the user inside the content. What submission review allows us to do is to link directly out from the gradebook into the content that created the grade. So whether that be a submission or a test or something like that, if somebody had a high originality score in Turnitin, you would be able to click on the score that they had in the gradebook, and it would load Turnitin's viewer with all of the matching originality check already highlighted. And kind of just, it's an ease of use thing. It's a nice flow for instructors and students to save them time of like where they would access the resources through LTI. And then the last service on here is Caliper Connect. So for people that aren't aware, Caliper is a different specification from the IMS. It's to do with sending out events and kind of analytics usage events. But the problem that we've had in the past is that Caliper endpoints and Caliper event stores were configured separately to LTI, meaning that if I had a platform that was Caliper capable and I had a tool that was Caliper capable, I would have to configure Caliper and its endpoints and its event stores in the platform, and then configure them all again in the tool, however that may work. What Caliper Connect allows us to do is it converts Caliper into an LTI service, meaning that Caliper can piggyback on LTI's existing credentials and kind of setup, making the integration between Caliper and LTI and the tool and the platform a lot more seamless, with less configuration for administrators or anybody else kind of working on it. So these are just some of the specifications. These are the ones that are in member candidate final. There are more kind of down the line that we're working on that range from kind of more technical specifications to help improve how we register LTI 1.3 tools, right up to new services and new capabilities to kind of enhance the features of what LTI is capable of. And then I've got one more slide on here for some handy resources. So everything that we've talked about here, all of the specifications are available from the IMS website. There's a link there to the kind of landing page for LTI and all the specifications. It also links out to the security framework documentation from there. And then on the other side, there's a link to a GitHub repository. This has kind of collection of all sorts of different test material, presentations that have been done, documents, example applications, anything like that. We've tried to collect as much as we can together and put it into this repository in GitHub. So there's links out to that. I'll also be putting a link out to this presentation so that people can access all of that. And yeah, so that is pretty much it. I think we're going to move on to question and answers in the last few minutes that we've got.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. And I guess before we get to some of the submitted questions that came through the Google form, it looks like there is one question in the chat, and then we can open it up to any just general questions about what you just heard from Martin, just as a introduction or back to basics to LTI and LTI Advantage. So a question in the chat, which I'm not sure at what point that came in, but it's from Pramod, who says, which specifications do we need to import list of courses into tool from platform? Is it one roster?
Yeah, so in general, you're only dealing with one resource at a time in LTI. So you would either want to do that through Common Cartridge will allow you to import a whole bunch of LTI links at once. So that's how you would deal with exporting and importing courses. Either that or one roster, which is more of a SIS kind of syncing system. If you're wanting to sync a whole kind of institution's courses from one system to another, then one roster would be the way of doing that.
Are there any other questions?
I was going to type one up, but I could just ask it out on the. I've got a couple. This is Mike Francis from Pearson. We're mostly a tool provider, though we also are a platform in some cases. But on the tool side, for the grades and assignments, we can pass back a grade with that are automatically scored, but the open scored items that require a teacher to do something, manual to grade, is that thought that the interface would be somewhere, would we deep link them into our tool to do that, or should we have some kind of way to pass that back to the platform to do that type of grading? What's the vision on that?
So that's generally done within the tool. So that was part of what was spoken about. If I go back a couple of slides here, so the submission review specification would help with that flow. The idea there would be that you could go from the gradebook where in the platform to directly to the tools. So if you had grading capabilities inside Pearson for something for an instructor to manually grade an assessment, then they could go into the platform's gradebook, click on the grade that they need to, or the assignment that they need to grade, and it would come up with their test or whatever content they were working on, and you could grade it from Pearson and then pass that back manually.
Got it. So similar to like our discovery tool for like bringing in the deep linking links, we'd expose some kind of grading tool inside that, like maybe the exact grading tool we use in the platform, but
yes, that's the idea.
And then when you're done with it, then whatever that grade is gets shipped back to the LTI.
And I would just add to that the assignment and grade service has the ability to return an needs grading status on an outcome. So you don't have to return a grade. Compared to basic outcome, you could only return grade. But with assignment service, you can return a submission that's been done and it's pending grading. And then this is where submission reviews can become handy, because from the platform gradebook, you would have a needs grading sign or something like that. And then for submission review, a bit like deep linking indeed, you would open back into the tool, but now in the context of that grade.
So maybe the needs grading link would link to our tool?
Yes, exactly. So basically, the needs grading would show this indicator in the platform gradebook. And if the platform gradebook implements submission review, then you would have a way to click back from that grade back into the tool. So therefore, you can open the submission and allow the instructor to do the grading, or the student to review his actual submission and whatever grading notes were made on that submission.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, that makes sense. I just want to go back to my team and make sure that that's how we're thinking about it.
Yeah, and also make sure if that's an important use case. Right now, it's a candidate. So we have a specification. We are lacking the platform support, and because it's a gradebook change, it's mostly a UI change. It's a bit more complicated. So I think it's always good to hear feedback that it's an important use case on the platform side, so that they get more incentive to modify and add this ability to link from the gradebook. Because again, it's so it's always a bit more work than just a plain service.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge for us is or as a tool, and the tool side is, okay, we have, they have to read this essay and do some work on it, in addition to whatever the AI did, or whatever the case may be, that it's an open item that they have to score. How do we create that context for them to score that? The goal is for them never to go back into our platform, to stay in the LMS platform, and so and then provide links. So it seems like that's so that linking that you're talking about is actually the candidate linking, but not
the submission review specification.
Review.
Yes. So there is a spec for it. That's a very good, important first step.
Yes, that's got it. Definitely. Okay, so that's helpful. And then otherwise, well, we can still send back a needs grading now, right?
Yes, you can always say, yeah, and but you see it's kind of missing. It's like half done. You can send a needs grading, but there is no way per specification to act on it.
Yeah,
so you'll have to find your own way to navigate back to the place to grade. And so the submission review kind of closes gap from the ability to report needs grading to the ability to actually easily go back into the grading mode.
Yeah, I'd love to hear back from the platforms like the Canvases of the world, or the schools of the world, if this is something they're looking at doing.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where there's a little bit of a chicken and egg with any of the new specifications that we have. It's always kind of getting the first platform and tool off the line is usually the trickiest, and then after that, everybody else follows a little bit easier.
Maybe we can partner up on this with it. That's great. I have one other question for you, was on the assignments. Not the assignment. I'm sorry. The rostering piece. I know was the second service.
Names and roles.
Names and roles. Thank you. So so the idea would be that the tool would, in this sense, would say, I have this asset, you can email the students in this class. What's the context that the tool's asking for the roles and
the context is whatever the context is within LTI. So generally that context is set to either a course context or sometimes like a module context or something like that. So it's any students within that.
Were you asking like the context onto what the use case is for, or the
yeah,
context?
well, I'm just thinking like you know, ideally we'd love to get out of the roster game and you know, use these services to help make sure that the right students have access to content. And so if the names and roles can replace that for us, that's awesome, right? So I'm just trying to figure out if, you know, through the launching, through letting the rosters and the users totally be managed by the platform, and then through the calls and through the name and roster call, then we know how to set up the necessary users in our system for, you know, the activities and the grading and all those other things that have to happen. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the use case, right, for that in theory.
That's one use case. Like for example, it would be possible for you to act and grade to know the student even if the student never launched in your tool, and therefore you act on that student in your tool, and that could be, for example, to force a grade in your tool on a student that actually never engaged with your tool, but it's part of the course, or do ad hoc courses, groups in your tool if you want to do that. Or it's basically it's not bounded in the idea of the use cases, but the ability to be able to return a grade or to act and do something on a user that actually has never engaged with the tool is one of the use cases.
I see. Yeah. So in other words, hey, here's a student that fits this context, but they haven't actually engaged yet. So
yes, they've not engaged, but yet you can see them. And especially if in your tool you show any kind of roster, it's always a bit awkward to see a slowly filling roster. It can be pre-filled up front.
Well, exactly. So that would be nice to be able to get them all instead of just waiting for them to click on it.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I just wanted to make sure I was on the right track with that. That's perfect.
So there are a couple more questions in the chat by the looks of things. So I'll try and answer those. So somebody's still got their mic on by the sounds of things. Oh, thanks. Yeah, so the first question in there is, for the tool, what's the unique identifier for the institution? I'm guessing this is talking about like how you can identify who you're going to bill, in a sense, in LTI 1.3 to say, you know, I have a customer who is this particular institution. I want to know that all of the requests coming from this institution are actually this institution, so that I can bill them. That's done by some and the deployment ID. How to look up? Sorry, Jim. How to look up institution platform settings? Can you elaborate on that slightly?
Yeah, so when a request comes in, each institution there, my understanding is we would need to know what their platform settings are, so we know what all those URLs that we have to hit when we return, when we make a response. So like if you go into Moodle, and you click and you see what the settings are for that platform, well, that'll vary from institution to institution. Canvas, if they're using the cloud infrastructure, that's probably consistent from one institution to another, but if they have their own Canvas set up, they would have their own
right,
their own URL. So just how do we know which? So it's when the request comes in. We can't just go by the ISS because, well, that's
there might be multiple.
Right.
Yeah. So this is talking about the initial OpenID Connect flow
Yes.
request.
Right.
Yeah. So the OpenID Connect specification implies that the login URL that is the initial OpenID Connect login URL plus the issuer is what makes that request unique. So if you're trying to tie a particular LTI registration to a request that's coming in, you should look at the issuer plus whatever the URL is and use that as a unique identifier. It's a slight how to put it. It's not the most elegant solution just because it's not something that comes up very often in pure OpenID Connect, but it's something that LTI in itself relies on. The way that most tools are handling it is they will give a unique OAuth URL to each person that registers. So whenever you set up a registration, you would generate mytool.com/OIDC/login/some UUID, and you would know that UUID on the end of your URL plus the issuer that is sent match with a particular registration in your database. And that's how you would recognize those credentials, at least.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, folks, it's the top of our hour, and I know we didn't get even hardly scratch the surface to the questions, some that were submitted prior to the meeting, and then it looks like there's still some open questions in the chat. I hate to delay this a month to get answers to these questions. There was one in particular, there were a couple that were submitted prior to the meeting that were related to support for certification. I just pasted a link to the main landing place for any kind of certification, LTI and any other IMS spec that has a certification connected to it. There's also a link on that page to a support at imsglobal.org or support@imsglobal.org to submit questions directly related to conformance certification. So I hope that helps. For the other questions that were recorded in the chat, I will transfer those over to the notes of our Google Doc, and we'll work to get those answered at our meeting next month. So appreciate your attendance today. Thanks again to Martin for this wonderful presentation. And Martin will add those slides and link to those slides to that shared Google document that many of you have been using to record your attendance today. And our next roundtable meeting, just to confirm the date, will be March 24th. So look forward to speaking to you all again then, and best of wishes in your adventures with LTI Advantage. Bye for now.